The fetch standard defines request and response objects and a function for obtaining a response from a request. It is defined by the Web Hypertext Application Technology Working Group. This screencast presents a recommended way to use the Fetch API that takes advantage of JavaScript promises and async await. The Fetch API is supported by all modern web browsers. Internet Explorer is the only popular browser without support. A polyfill is available at the URL on the screen. It supports Internet Explorer 10 and above. REST services typically use HTTP verbs in a specific way. Post request, create a resource, get request, retrieve one, put request, update a resource, and delete request, delete one. Put and post request often include a JSON body. It is useful to create a small set of utility functions that hide the details of these operations. The file fetch-util.js presented next does this. Feel free to copy it and use it in your projects. We begin by defining the constant URL_ prefix that will be prepended to all the URLs passed to the functions here. If your application uses REST services at many different domains, feel free to not use this constant and instead pass full URLs into these functions. The object options holds all of the common options that are needed by all of your REST calls. If any of these are needed, this is the place to add them. Two of the functions here require the HTTP content type header to be set to application/JSON, so that's defined here and reused in those two functions. This function deletes a REST resource. Notice how the HTTP verb is passed to the fetch function in an options object. We can't simply name this function delete because that's a JavaScript keyword. These functions get the JSON or text representation of a REST resource. They differ only in the response method that is called to extract the response body. These functions create or update a REST resource. They differ only in the HTTP verb that is used. Functions that use the await keyword to wait for a promise to resolve or reject must be marked with the async keyword. Such functions always return a promise. When uses of await are wrapped in a try-catch, promises that throw will cause the catch block to execute. For normal functions, this looks like the box on the left. For arrow functions, this looks like the box on the right. To create a new resource inside an async function, write code like shown here. To retrieve the JSON representation of an existing resource inside an async function, write code like shown here. To update an existing resource inside an async function, write code like shown here. And finally, to delete an existing resource inside an async function, write code like shown here. For a complete example of using this approach, see the GitHub repo at the URL on the screen. This demonstrates using the Fetch API from a web app implemented in Vue to a backend implemented in Node.js and Express that talks to a Postgres database. Many of these are simply implementation details, and you can focus only on the use of the Fetch API. That's it. You now know everything you need to call REST services using the Fetch API. Thanks for watching. For details on OCI events and training, see the URLs on the screen.